like and subscribe. Now, what are some psychology experiments with interesting results? White rats and black rats were raised separately without seeing each other. When a black rat was placed in the white rat's cage, the other rats ostracized him. When white and black rats are raised together and a new black rat is placed in a cage, the white rats accept him. So basically rats are racist, unless raised to accept differences. Not entirely sure it fits into the category, but the Rosenhan experiment. 13 people feigned mental illnesses to get into mental hospitals and all were admitted with different diagnoses. They then assumed their normal personalities, but to be released they all had to admit that they were mentally ill. There was a second part where a hospital challenged Rosenhan to send multiple fake patients to the hospital and they would rate their patients on a scale of whether they think they were faking. They identified many possible fakers, but Rosenhan in fact hadn't sent anyone. If you stare into a dimly lit, that is, candlelit, mirror for 10+ minutes you start to see hallucinations. What individuals see tends to vary, but they've used this as a test to simulate schizophrenia before because some see monsters, deformities, general weird I did a variation of it for a mate at uni and completely wimped out of it. After my face started not looking like my face anymore, I had a complete dissociation. I stopped looking and just waited out the time. Now what I know I'm doing tonight. I loved learning about infant development. My favorite was probably the development of depth perception, or perhaps the fear of heights. We're not born with it, but, if I recall correctly, we develop it within the first year or so. Scientists created a raised square platform. Half of the floor was wood and the other glass. The actual surface of the floor, 1 meter or so below, was white with red polka dots. At varying intervals of age the babies would be brought in and placed on the wood end and encouraged to crawl to their moms who were standing at the glass end of the platform. In early infancy baby crawls over there without giving a At some point though they stop at the point where the wood meets the glass or plexiglass maybe, showing that they recognize the difference in height and the fear of falling. Babies' brains are pretty effing cool. Reconsolidation. When you retrieve memory from your long-term memory, it is susceptible to being manipulated. This can lead to memories being totally changed from the source. This is why eyewitness accounts cannot be fully seen as true. This knowledge is also being used to help people with PTSD by changing the negative memories they have of their particular trauma. The influence of the color red in sports. Judges were shown a video of a taekwondo match and awarded more points to the red competitor versus the blue competitor. When the colors were digitally reversed, judges awarded more points to the other, now red, competitor. Wish that could somehow help the Arkansas Razorbacks SMH. There have been some experiments conducted, but the negativity effect, negativity bias is really sad to me. https nwikipedia.org wiki negativity bias. It basically says that negative things have a greater emotional and psychological toll on our health than positive neutral things. So you got an A on a test, that's great, but you totally fail a test, and the world crumbles and it's a total disaster. 100 things can go right and work perfectly throughout the day, but it goes totally undetected in our minds. Then someone cuts us off in traffic and we fume and rage. I learned about this theory almost 3 years ago and think about it all the time. Reminds me to appreciate and notice the many little things in my day that did go right. Mice were put on two sides of a wall with a door in. Only the right mouse could open the door. Slowly, they filled the left mouse's room with water and eventually when right mouse saw them in danger, they opened the door. However, mice that had previously been on the left side and were now on the right, mice who had previously been wetted opened the door considerably faster because they knew how unpleasant it was to be in the other scenario. Basically mice have empathy. This makes me happy. I wish more posts on this were about things like this. I want to know more. Empathy is consciousness simulating consciousness. When you are talking to someone through a medium, internet, real life, you are estimating their conscious state by recursively defining your own conscious state in their terms in order to predict their future behavior. That's why mentally ill people are treated so poorly. It's hard to predict their behavior, thus dehumanizing them. It's not that psychopaths lack empathy, but rather, they have the manual settings. A specific region of the brain lights up when people experience empathy. For most people it's an automatic, subconscious response. but in a study where they showed emotional videos to psychopaths and none while scanning their brains, psychopaths would only light that region of the brain when specifically asked to feel for the character, while the control participants would light up automatically. So, would it be possible to be some kind of benevolent psychopath, one who always or mostly chooses to empathize? I just recently heard of blindsightedness during one of my cognitive psychology classes. Basically the area of the brain that processes what our eyes see is located at the back of the head, just where your skull starts to get smaller, towards your neck. Because of this, if you hit your head back there quite often everything will go black for a moment before sight returns again. Sometimes though, following severe trauma to this area of the brain, like after falling off a ladder onto a curb or something, a person is never able to see again. For a long time it was assumed that the eyes were somehow incapable of seeing following the trauma and that was why people were blind. However, it's been shown that it is just the processing of the images that is damaged. In other words, your eyes are still working away, viewing images, but your brain is unable to process the images so you can't see them. Some experiments looking into this have found that people with damage to this area can still navigate around things in front of them, without realizing they are doing it. So if you told someone with this damage to walk down a corridor, and you placed obstacles in their way, they wouldn't be able to see the obstacles but they could avoid bumping into them because their eyes are still able to view them and send signals to other areas of the brain to avoid knocking things. This is known as blindsightedness. Blew my little mind tbh. The car crash experiment. It demonstrated that the way investigators would a question has an immediate effect on the subject's memory of an event. It was part of a suite of studies by Elizabeth Loftus, with various other co-researchers, that began to call into question the veracity of eyewitness accounts. I took a class on human memory and let me tell you, we don't remember anything very well, including your recollection of that class, and this is why eyewitness testimony is one of the absolute worst and least reliable form of evidence in criminal court. Of course, it's treated the exact opposite, and innocent people are killed because of it. Mistaken eyewitness identifications contributed to approximately 71% of the more than 350 wrongful convictions in the United States overturned by post-conviction DNA evidence. Innocence Project. One time I saw a semi drive through a train crossing arm that was coming down on him. Watched it with my own eyes. Gave my statement to the public works guy less than 30 minutes later that indeed the light was green the entire time and he had no warning it was coming down. Pulled him our video footage and everything. The light was red. So red. For so long. But I remember it being green. Memory sucks and I'll never trust anyone's eyewitness testimony again. I can't even trust my own. One time I participated in a paid research experiment. I was basically tricked into thinking I was drunk. I was placed in a room with 2 other people and we were instructed to drink vodka with cranberry juice over a period of time while we socialized. After we drank I was placed in a room where I had to read some flashing words on a computer. I felt pretty drunk at this point. When the researcher came back into the room he gave me my car keys and said I was never actually given alcohol. He briefly told me that because I was anticipating drinking for this experiment that my brain had tricked me into feeling the effects of being intoxicated. I immediately snapped out of it and was completely amazed at how I felt. I've done this to younger siblings and relatives that won't shut up about wanting to drink shots. We just rub a bit of alcohol round the rim of the shot glass and fill it with water. 3 deep and Thiel starts snoozing on the sofa within the hour. Wow, that's like a cross between the placebo effect and conformity. That is super interesting. Do you have a link to an article about it or anything from your experience? Solomon Ash's experiment on conformity. He set up a test wherein he would show 3 lines of different lengths to 5 or 6 individuals. I forgot the exact number, who had to state which line was the longest of the 3. The thing is, only the last individual is the participant and the others are actors paid to answer in a specific manner. For the first few questions, they choose the correct answer, but later on they start choosing the wrong one. The participants are conflicted as to whether they will say the correct answer or conform to the wrong answer as to not be judged by others or due to self-doubt of their own answers. In the end, most do conform, It's really interesting since it shows how powerful conformity is in the face of doubt, up to a point that some even question their own sanity during the test. Another variation of the experiment also had interesting results. It had the same setup with 5 individuals, with the last person being the participant. However, this time some of the actors say the wrong answer while one actor says the correct one. There was an increase in participants who would choose the correct answer and avoid conformity. It shows how much doubt one can have on oneself when alone, but be brought back to self-confidence when they find outside support. It is amazing. I did this experiment in my school, as a high school thesis kind of thing, and the age difference affects the results. The older the kid, the quicker they decided to change their answer. Aaron and Dutton, 1974. Misattribution of arousal. Men who had just walked across bridge, either steady or unsteady, were approached by a female psychology student, posing to do a project on the effects of exposure to scenic attractions on creative expression. The men had to complete a questionnaire and write a short dramatic story about a picture she provided, and she gave them her phone number if they had more questions. Men who walked across the shaky bridge were more likely to call her up because they misattributed the arousal from the bridge to the woman. TLDR. Watch a horror movie on the first date. What if I see a comedy on the first date but hire someone to mug us outside the theater? TLDR. Watch a horror movie on the first date, or take them to an abandoned hospital for urban exploring. Worked really well, and now I know the science behind it. The phantom limb experiment is pretty fascinating. Basically, you can be tricked into feeling something that's not there. Here's an article about the experiment. I had a uvulectomy. My dangly thing was removed. The doctor said I may have phantom limb syndrome. He was right. I felt like I had something in my throat for like 3-4 months. It's crazy how we never notice something like a uvula, but once it's gone we notice it. I had my uterus removed at 24 due to medical reasons. I was warned that because I'd been in pain for over a decade I would likely experience phantom womb. 4 years later and I'm still having pain there. Some days almost as bad before my surgery, but there is literally nothing there to cause that pain. It's so weird. I'm making progress with a pain specialist and therapist, but yeah, the mind is a crazy place. This also works with dicks. Can't recommend. Not just one experiment, but a whole thesis and series of works supporting it. According to the just world fallacy, we expect good or bad things to happen to people for a reason and go to pretty interesting length to make up for the lack of justice. Like someone winning the lottery and us thinking they deserve it. Not a psychologist, but the one where given a choice between sitting down doing nothing and shocking oneself, people tend to choose the shock. Ergo, we would choose pain over boredom. Curiosity over boredom maybe? Stimuli, even. Negative, no stimuli. I don't know the name of it, but apparently two people become closer if they survive through something together. Not even actual surviving death scenarios, but anything that has you on your toes and heart racing, like a roller coaster. Had to look it up, because I remember hearing about this one. Misattribution of arousal, not necessarily sexual arousal, but any sort of heightened or hairline emotional state. If you're with someone, your brain may link the two. We looked at a case study of a couple who weren't that great for each other. They had fairly destructive tendencies and a good bit of argumentation, non-compromise, and tearing each other down. But they were wildly, crazy, rom-com level head over heels for each other. Their early dating included roller coaster rides, the car breaking down at 10 p.m. while it was snowing and they had to walk home miserable, the store being robbed while they were there, and a death in each family. Early dating included roller coaster rides, the car breaking down at 10 p.m. while it was snowing and they had to walk home miserable, the store being robbed while they were there, and a death in each family. Don't go giving people ideas. That's a rough experiment. Got it. First date had 6 flags. This actually works. My psychology professor and his now wife's first date was at an amusement park because he was trying to take advantage of this phenomenon. Like having a bomb on a bus and the bomb being armed as soon as the bus gets to 50 miles per hour. True romance. I remember that movie. I think it was called The Bus That Couldn't Slow Down. My friend was describing all the horrible she had to do to get into his frat. I couldn't understand. Like literally I didn't have a clue as to his motives for doing this. He described that the friends whose AS were whipped alongside his became the closest he ever had. It is known in psychology that male bonding through shared negative emotions makes strongest friendships. Extreme examples of this taken to practice is recruiting practices of African warlords. They abduct boys from parents and force peer groups of total noobs and fresh guys with some experience to commit atrocities together. After a quick while, guys who were abducted and wanted to run away to their parents and never cared for whatever goal the group is fighting become loyal to core to this brotherhood joined around disgusting experiences. Of course, Africa warlords didn't plan this as a scientific method, but it is a trial and error Darwinian principle, as groups using this keep on cohesive and organized while those not employing it just don't. It is also an example of groups that ask a lot from members, keep them, while those who ask little, lose them. Humans are anything but individualistic. Wagner and his white bears. Essentially, people who were instructed to not think about a white bear found themselves thinking about it more than those actively trying to think about one. Wagner walks up to test subject seated in a nice room with a desk Wagner could sit at, and puts face very close to theirs. Don't think about white bears. 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 Participant. Why? Wagner. Did you think of white bears? Participant. Yes. Wagner scribbles notes furiously on notepad. Wagner walks to the other room linked to this room divided by a wall. In it is another random participant in the same laid out room as previous participant. Sits at desk. Wagner. So did you think about white bears while I was gone? Participant 2. No. Wagner furiously scribbles notes on notepad. That's about how I imagine that went, but I'm gonna go read it now. The game. Psychologically explained. You just lost. If you train a rat to press a lever for Coke, and then put it in a box with only that lever, it will press that lever as much as you'll allow it. The rat will stop eating and drinking and just do Coke. If you train a rat to press a lever for Coke and then put it in an enriched environment, egg, other rats to play with, toys, place to explore, where it could still press the lever for Coke. It may press the lever occasionally but not as frequently as its counterpart in the dull environment. These findings were a big deal in the behaviorism world because they put a lot of previous results into context and help explain the link between poverty and drug use. Dunning-Kruger effect is one of my favorites. Basically, people with less expertise in a field will overestimate their abilities in the given field because they don't know enough to see the limits of their expertise. At the same time, experts tend to underestimate their abilities because they know too well what they don't know. The phenomenon has, among other factors, been linked to anti-vaxxers, who overestimate their expertise, not seeing what they don't know, with dire consequences. There was an experiment to measure the dopamine, i.e. happiness, hit your brain takes when eating something you're craving. The dopamine builds with the anticipation and peaks right as you take the first bite. Then, after the first moment it's in your mouth, the dopamine levels begin to decrease. This showed that many times we are desiring, guess I'll keep dreaming instead of achieving it lol. The Rosenthal effect, the prejudice and expectations you have towards a student, contestant etc. highly dictates his performance in the long run. Look it up. Pygmalion effect. I was at an educational weekend for teachers and the lecturer asked, or rather challenged, whether we want to know stuff about our students when we first start teaching them, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what we have to be careful about, etc. It broke my heart when a large number of teachers said yes. It made their job easier. I spoke up, saying it's better not to know anything except health and safety concerns because it's then easier to avoid prejudice, and some of them quite haughtily replied they are mature enough to avoid that, as if it's STH that doesn't happen subconsciously. It's sad teachers aren't taught these things while in training. Was a teacher in state of MI, USA. We were taught this. If people have the upper hand they will put others down to keep it. An experiment told a class of kids that having blue eyes meant you were smarter, achieved more etc. All of a sudden kids with blue eyes formed their own groups. Things like bullying and exclusion of other eye colors started too. They repeated the experiment with different eye colors in different classes, all with the same results. The more interesting, terrifying thing was that halfway through, they swapped the experiment and told all of the kids that having brown eyes meant you were smarter. The flip in beliefs was immediate, as was the bullying. They tried the experiment again, giving the kids green or yellow collars. Thus the difference was not even inherent. Bullying and exclusion began. Flip the superior and inferior group. The behavior inverted. Possibly the worst part was when the children started believing that they were in fact dumber for having brown eyes or a green collar. They began to internalize the belief, and they did so quickly. I wonder if that is true for blonde jokes. Split brain studies. One example. By providing differing information to each hemisphere of the brain in split brain individuals, those with a severed corpus callosum, meaning there's no communication between the two hemispheres, they found that people would actually physically grab their own hand with their other hand if they saw it making a mistake. Basically each side of the brain controls one side of your body, and in split brain people you can actually make both sides display a disagreement with the other, which is insane. If you think about it, there's another similar experiment where people with split brains have one eye able to see a picture and the other eye can't see it. Then they draw the picture with one hand. While they are drawing the picture, if you ask them, they have no idea what the image they are being shown is. It's like they can't see it even though they can draw it. Also, if you give someone like this a fork and cover their left eye, they'll be able to tell you what you use it for, but not be able to recall what it's called. Then cover the other eye and they'll instantly be able to tell you that it's a fork, but will have no idea what you use it for. Weird but also interesting gasp. Welp. The salmon study. To test a behavioral procedure in an MRI machine, the experimenters got a dead salmon to use as a dummy, as it had to be something organic. They were in shock when they discovered that the fMRI was recording increased bold response, blood oxygen level dependent, in the dead salmon when running their experiment, suggesting this dead salmon's brain was somehow reacting to the experiment. This led to the findings that fMRI is not perfect and we should expect a certain level of false positives, highlighting the importance of retests and tighter statistical analyses. I think people are missing what is the obvious case here: zombie salmon. Research on learned helplessness is fascinating. Researchers would put dogs into shuttle boxes, long cage-like structures that the dog could move around in, and would shock the dog through the floor on one side of the box. The dog, at first, could easily escape the shock by moving to the other side of the box. Eventually, the researcher adds a wall so the dog can't escape the shocks, it just sits there, being shocked without escape. Through this the dog learns helplessness over repeated trials and extended periods of time. Even when the wall is taken down, the dog won't walk to the other side and avoid the shocks anymore. It has become so used to the pain that it doesn't even try to escape when escape would be easy. This research has been used to explain certain aspects of human behavior, especially related to repeated experiences of abuse, addiction, and poverty. It takes a long time to get somebody out of this mindset, and is possibly one of the reasons why people get stuck in terrible situations. For everyone concerned about the dogs, this experiment was done in 1967. It's much more difficult to use animals in experiments like this, and this particular one would be considered unethical now. Thank you for what I might call an epiphany. The case study done of Jeannie. She was a severely neglected child that never learned to speak. It became apparent that it is not possible to learn a first language as an adolescent. Hedonic adaptation. Put simply, a person who had just won the lottery and another person who had just been paralyzed took a survey to measure their life contentment. Obviously it was high and low, respectively. However, they both took the same survey a year later and both scored similarly. The point being that regardless what happens to you in life, good or bad, you will always adapt and spend most of your life feeling neutral. Yeah, it's just like when you're sick from the flu or whatever. You really wish you weren't sick, but then when you're not sick, it's not like you feel grateful for not being sick. You just feel neutral and don't really care. This is really interesting. I never thought about this. I guess you have completely new highs and lows under different circumstances. There was some study I read about a few years ago that says people's overall happiness is either set at a young age or just kind of innate. You tend to be happy or unhappy regardless of your situation. As where most people tend to think you are made happy or unhappy by life. It kind of measures well with what I've observed. I've known incredibly well-to-do people and incredibly poor people. Happiness doesn't seem to correlate to that a lot from my experience. But maybe I'm just looking for an excuse as to why I'm a miserable bastard when I have most the things most people want. Although to counter the study I'll say that the happiest people I've known generally have lots of people who care about them and who they care about, and I've never known someone who is simultaneously happy and lonely. The rule tends to be the less ethical the experiment is, the more interesting. The Little Albert experiment. A psychologist conditioned a baby into being scared of white, fluffy things. I also like this one very much. Scientists replicated 100 recent psychology experiments. More than half of them failed. Subjects were tested for introvert versus extrovert personality types. Prediction was that when placed in a sensory deprivation chamber, the introverts would be able to handle it easily while the extroverts would not. Exactly the reverse was found. Introverts became agitated quickly and performed all manners of self-stimulation. Extroverts quickly went to sleep. What the finding showed was that it's introverts who are the sensation seekers, needing stimulation from the outside world. Extroverts create their own internal sensation and project that out to the world. Just the general psychological phenomenon of loss aversion. In cognitive psychology and decision theory, loss aversion refers to people's tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. It is better to not lose $5 than to find $5. It's basically why insurance companies exist.